So hi, my name's Stewart Smith. I work for MySQL AB/Sun Microsystems out of Melbourne, Australia, not Melbourne, Florida, and not Austria. There's a whole bunch of funny stuff about people getting those confused, but really it's Australian, not Austrian. But apparently the employment laws there are better, so really I should just sign that one that said Austria. So I'm doing a bit today about sort of where we're at, sort of where are we with the MySQL server and MySQL in general. But I'd sort of start off a little bit saying a bit about what happened on January 16th, which you may recall there was something that happened, and we're in this horrible, horrible Orlando hotel. When you have giant concrete swans, you know things aren't going to go well. But so we're in this awful hotel having an all-company meeting, which is when everyone gets there. So you meet people who aren't developers, which is this strange and unusual breed of people. But we all got ready in the morning, grabbing some morning coffee and sitting down everywhere. And I purposely picked these photos because they're not developers. But we got ready, and Kai and Martin were talking a bit. And then Martin got up. He's our CEO / now Senior Vice President of the database group at Sun. And introduced this guy because he announced that we're going to be acquired by Sun. So they did this whole talk thing and said that they met and exchanged T-shirts. And you'll notice that Jonathan's there is wearing a MySQL shirt. So who took over who was debatable. And of course, Rich Green came up. He's a big software guy at Sun and said, hi, we're all friendly, and gave Martin a T-shirt because it's like technology, so we have to exchange T-shirts. I believe it's written in the laws somewhere. And it all ended pretty well. And Monty, one of the founders, came up and said, you know what, I think this is actually a good idea, because the big thing for us is, of course, is it a good idea? Is this going to go down well? Do the founders think it's a good idea? And the answer was, well, yeah. So Monty and David and people, the founders and the board and management thought it was a good thing. So that sort of allayed a bunch of fears. We had a bit of a chat. You have that chat about all the technical things, and the lawyers get up and say, you're not allowed to say this, that, or the other, and comment this, and yada, yada, yada. But we got over that, and that's okay. And of course, being MySQL, vodka was served. And this alarmed the Sun people that vodka was being served to 500-odd people at 12:04 in the afternoon. But we found this perfectly normal and have seemingly introduced this to Sun culture now. So, not that we encourage it, but it was pretty cool. We led sort of the drinking songs, this big MySQL tradition of Scandinavian drinking songs. Enough that there's a joke that there is actually a CD somewhere that has like Martin's drinking songs from company-wide conference calls. But so we did the whole drinking thing, and Kai undertook the tradition, I think it was a Russian originally, of throwing the glass over your shoulder, which, amusing anecdote, if you do that in Japan, it really shocks the Japanese. Martin did that, and it was a bang, and they're like going, what? You can't do that? So we're fairly happy with it. It's okay. And this is one of the welcome gifts that Sun sent out, which was pretty cool, that they've decided that these guys obviously drink. But something about doing databases drives you to alcohol. But, we got this sent out, which was pretty cool. So we're fairly happy. And then, of course, there's a giant amount of paperwork. Personally, I counted like over 40 pages or something. So it turns out working for Sun is not sort of like a paperless or 1 or 2 pages thing. So that was a bit painful. But we got over it and back to real work. Sorry, real work. So we did get back to real work and sort of like tried to keep with that. So it's generated extra work, but we're not sort of like too overwhelmed. It's just still pretty exciting and still a bit overwhelming, but we're getting there. How is the integration? Well, we're actually pretty much transplanting the entire engineering organization across, so we're not sort of like reorganizing the whole engineering org. So we don't really care, right? I mean, there's now sort of an extra boss or two above Martin, but that's about it. So we're not sort of worried about that. We've got a whole bunch of like Postgres team now in the database group as well, which is kind of exciting. So now like Josh Burkus and I are now sort of like under the same group, which, never thought that, MySQL and Postgres people would be the same database group in an org. So that's pretty exciting. So it's going... You hear I released a book. I was going to say, there's been some treacherous things with fire. You can't see the photo here, but, there's another cheesy Orlando thing. But, I've released a book. There are 2 books that I've got author credits on. Both of them you should buy because they're brilliant. I will happily sign them to reduce their value. But, one of them is Practical Myth TV, So if you like MythTV and video recording stuff, go buy my practical MythTV book. It's like $20 from Amazon, so it's great value. The other one is if you're interested in MySQL cluster, we do like certification for MySQL cluster now. So there's the MySQL cluster certification study guide if you want a slightly long title for a book. So I also wrote part of that. You want a pimp as well, yeah. So some things have been a bit treacherous in acquisitions and stuff, but we've emerged okay. Just the branding now slightly different. We have sun next to everything, including people's strange temporary tattoos, because that's fun. But sun actually has been overwhelmingly positive. We've got a lot of positive reaction from people. And one of the great things now is that instead of having like a few hundred people selling MySQL stuff, we've now got like 17,000. So it kind of income streams. But that's pretty cool. So hopefully they're going to learn from us. They've said they want to, especially in like the software freedom kind of angle. A lot of us inside MySQL are pretty heavy software freedom people. So hopefully we're going to get more of that inside Sun and like convince people about the right thing. We've certainly been making a bunch of noise, and sort of they're paying attention and noticing like new and better ways to do things. Where Sun's going through this like gradual transition from what's been sort of like rather closed to now something that's rather open. So they've made bunch of false steps, I think, over the past, but they're getting better, and hopefully they'll learn a bit of that from us. But we need to learn from them a bit as well. Learning how to do prompt releases would be nice. We're like really bad at doing releases in any prompt time frame, but hopefully we'll get there, and hopefully somebody knows how to do it. But it's pretty much business as usual. I mean, we haven't really noticed much day-to-day change. I mean, more paperwork to sign to get employed, and some other IT stuff, but we don't really care yet. So we're going okay. It's still LAMP. Don't let anyone tell you it's like going to be like Solaris only or something. No way. Most MySQL developers use Linux on the desktop. It's the way it's staying. We're not all switching to Solaris. But sure, we now have better access to the Solaris group. I mean, yay. And better access to hardware, so that's cool. But it's still a LAMP stack, and we're not changing platform priorities or anything. So some recent news in the MySQL server world. Recently came out MySQL Workbench. I don't know if anyone's seen this tool before. It was like originally announced a while ago. They did like an alpha release that was just a little bit buggy. But it was like, this tool's really cool, if only it didn't fucking segfault. So one of the really cool things is like they sat around, they went down in a corner and said they're going to focus like on one platform and actually get it stable and stuff. So they've now at what they call RC3, which is nearing an actual release. But the most impressive thing about it when the lead developer demoed it to me a while ago at the DevConf was that it didn't crash during the demo. So I thought that was fairly cool. And didn't when I went and did a few other things with it. So it seems like it's actually getting stable. The bad news is that they're stabilizing on Windows first and not Linux, so I can't actually use it in my box yet. But all the portability stuff's still there, and it's like the Canvas widgets and stuff are like GL-based and stuff, so it's kind of cool. Yeah. So if you've heard of DB Designer 4, that's sort of the old product, and this is based off it. So it's kind of like they hired the developers. We hired the developers to make them do sort of version 2 or something of that. So it's getting there, and I thought I'd show a bit of it, which you may or may not be able to see. The idea of MySQL Workbench is you can actually go and edit or design database schema and diagrams and stuff and sort of do it all graphically and nice instead of like typing SQL everywhere. So you can actually like look at tables and build like relationships between them, and it can actually like infer them. So if you've got like foreign keys in your database, it knows how to draw these links. So you can sort of go, hi, just import this, and it goes splat, here's a diagram of your database. And you can like put labels next to things and other things and notes and push and poke things around. So it's actually fairly cool, especially because it now actually works and doesn't crash at all. And you can do things like bring out your tables, click not null and stuff, and auto increment stuff. Select engines and stuff like that, and set up partitioning and everything by click, 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 instead of remembering the sometimes Baroque SQL syntax, which is kind of nice. Also useful for documenting stuff if you actually want an image of this database schema that you can't remember how it works, because that sometimes happens, which is pretty cool. It has all nice highlighty things and relationship stuff. So I think it's nice. There's also MySQL Query Browser, which is a simple GUI for like writing in SQL queries, and you kind of construct them graphically a little bit. And you can see the result set and edit them and import it, export it, that kind of stuff, which is kind of neat. And there's also MySQL Administrator, which is like an admin tool that has like an interface to like MySQL dump for doing backups and stuff and add, remove users, that kind of thing. So they've added a lot of new versions as well, so it's a lot more stable than it used to be if you've tried any of the earlier versions. So I quite like them now, and I'm like a command line guy. So Maria is also the name of somebody's child, but it's also a new storage engine. There seems to be the tradition of naming it after children. So this did a recent release that's sort of a 1.0 preview kind of thing. And you can kind of think of it in one way, but it's based on MySQL 5.1 currently. So it's the next stable release of MySQL. MySQL 5.1 is currently in beta/release candidate, depending on who you ask. But the official website says RC. But it's based on 5.1 at the moment, and Maria is actually based on top of MyISM. So you may be familiar with the MyISM engine, which is sort of like the default old hat MySQL storage engine, where the idea is that it's small, quick, fast. The problems with it being it's non-transactional and it's not crash safe. So if your database server crashes with the table open for write, you have to run integrity check, which may or may not be a good thing, and not having transactions may or may not be a good thing, but hey, it's really fast. So it's based on MyISM, and the 1.0 preview Maria is heading for a crash-safe MyISM. So trying to keep the same properties of MyISM in performance, but actually have it crash-safe. So if your database server or machine crashes while you're doing updates to the table, it'll run a recovery and get there really quickly. So it has a log on it. And I've actually been using it a bit. I'm writing this other app that's fairly abusive of databases, because it's doing some weird storage stuff in there. And it does actually keep a lot of the performance characteristics. It's actually much closer to MyISM performance than InnoDB for something. So it's actually pretty true to its word of keeping MyISM performance kind of thing, and with crash safety. And this is before they've done speed optimization. So I'm kind of like really hopeful. But think of it as crash-safe MyISM, and currently what it does is after a crash it recovers to either the start of the last statement, so each statement is currently a transaction, even though it's not transactional, or the last lock table. So you can sort of implement sort of poor man's transactions by locking a set of tables and doing changes to it and unlock, and it sort of applies or doesn't atomically, which is kind of neat. In the next future releases, they're actually planning like full transactional support with like multiple writers and everything. So that should be fairly cool, and which is kind of hopeful for the future. And it's based on lots of tested MyISM code, which is something I like, where it's like not entirely new code everywhere. Tested stuff's good because it's more likely to work. So it's kind of nice having a lot of tested code come into Maria. Upcoming, they're saying this 1.5 preview. So they're doing sort of a bunch of milestone releases that they want to get sort of like bug-free before doing each step, which is kind of nice. The 1.5 preview is the idea is they're going to add versioning. So this can go along to do concurrent updates and like different isolation levels. So you do like repeatable read or something like that. And simultaneous writers. So currently Maria is still like MyISM, where there's like one writer. And in a future release, they'll make it so there's multiple writers at once. So that should help a lot when you're doing lots of simultaneous writes. So you can actually download like source trees and binary builds of it from the MySQL Forge wiki, so forgemysql.com, and you can link through the wiki on that to Maria preview. Maria is possibly the most well publicly documented design of a database storage engine possibly ever. I mean, one that's at least possibly going to be in wider use. So all the design stuff's all up there as well, like in worklog and stuff. I'll talk about that in a tick. And I'll talk... Good, not my phone. But yeah, MySQL Forge, so I've mentioned that. You may or may not be aware of this website, but it's kind of this community kind of thing, where the idea is that, there's the new release, which of course is labeled 2.0, because Jay thinks it's funny, but everything must be 2.0 now. So it's Web 2.0. You may have heard of Enterprise 2.0. This is the latest thing that some marketing idiots come up with, but everything's 2.0. But this is a new release of it. It's all Web 2.0-y. Which is kind of nice. The idea is that there's all sort of people there and you can like add projects and stuff like that. So a few of the projects that are up on there that you may or may not be aware of, we've got cool stuff like external language stored procedures. So MySQL in 5.0 got stored procedures, which are ANSI SQL 2003 stored procedures, if you just want a mouthful, which is rather close to what DB2 does. And it's in this SQL standard, which is like something you should never read because it hurts your brain. But a bunch of other databases can have other languages run stored procedures. So what two of the MySQL guys did, saying they want to write stored procedures in Java, and this was before the Sun acquisition. They weren't drinking then, but others of us were. But so they've now got it working so you can write stored procedures in Java. This is in a separate source tree and stuff up there, and also in Perl. I have this pet project where I want to get down for like 2 hours hacking and do stored procedures in C, because I like writing in C, and you can do like libtcc as a compiler. So if anyone like wants to do evil stuff like that, talk to me. I want to do it. But external language stored procedures is pretty promising for some future release. We'll also do other cool things, like Giuseppe's written a program called MySQL Sandbox. So you want to test various versions of MySQL. This just sort of like sets them up, installs them, and runs them kind of deal, instead of having to go manually through downloading, install, set up, click, click, click kind of thing. So it's kind of useful if you want to test a number of versions at once, which is what he wants to do. There's also memcached functions for MySQL. So you may be familiar with memcache, just like this cool little in-memory caching thing. You can either, it's a key value-based thing. You either store a key with a value or get it or delete it and a few other rules. So you can actually now sort of address these directly from functions in the SQL server. So you can directly store and receive stuff in functions in the SQL server, which is kind of neat. Also, I haven't listed it here, but Brian Aker's been working on a memcache storage engine. So MySQL, you can plug in how the data is stored. So you can either store it in like MyISM or InnoDB or any other way that you can do it. It's a nice little API there. Well, nice. But, there is an API there. And he's written a memcache storage engine. So you actually have a table in the database server that when you insert something in there, it goes into memcache. And if you select something, you have to select on a key, because memcache doesn't actually let you select all keys. So if you select with a specific key from the memcache table, you get back that value from memcache. So it's kind of this table where if you select star with no where condition, you get nothing. But if you select with a key, you get something back. And it's all out of memcache, which is kind of cool. So you can get that from Brian's website. There's also a project of general purpose stored routine library. So the idea is a bunch of stuff you commonly do in stored procedures, stored routines, kind of build up a library of them instead of everyone writing them themselves and getting them wrong. There's also a program called InnoTop, which is kind of an InnoDB version of Top. So you can sort of monitor InnoDB status like in a top-like interface. There's also someone did that for MySQL Cluster as well. I think more people use InnoTop. Personally, I don't really use InnoDB everywhere because I'm a MySQL Cluster guy, so all my tables are cluster, except my Myth TV box. That's still MyISM. But PBXT as well is another storage engine developed out of Germany by a couple of guys, by a company behind that. Use a lot. He's getting more into publishing industry and stuff, but he's kind of getting interesting stuff and storing blobs in the database and doing sort of efficient transfer of blobs in and out of the database instead of what we do now. So it's kind of interesting to look at, and I've been meaning to try some more performance stuff on it recently, but that's fairly cool. So have a look at it as well. MySQL Proxy, you may have heard of this. This is kind of a relatively new thing. It's Jan Konechki's baby. And you can think of it, I'll talk a bit about it later, but there's way more projects up on there on MySQL Forge. So do have a look out there. There's a lot of cool stuff is there as well. But there's also a lot of little tools and code snippets. So if you wondered how do I do some weird self-join or do some admin stuff or whatever with MySQL, there's all sorts of code snippets up there, in various languages and stuff. So there's actually a large collection. There's also a tool we call Worklog, which is originally internal to MySQL, which is kind of like you have an idea for the SQL server, you make a worklog entry, and you work each month on worklogs, as in they're little tasks of varying complexity. But we now got a public interface to that, and because the internal interface is still kind of crap. But the external one is it's got a comment thing and stuff like that, and you can vote on it and stuff like that for what things you actually want to see in the MySQL server. But it's sort of a link into an internal tool that we've used for ages, which is kind of cool. There's some stuff that isn't marked as public there, because if it's specific for a customer, you can't sort of detail out the customer's business out publicly. So there's a few of those there, but mostly they should be open. So that's when you see us reference WL and some number. There's also a wiki, which is increasingly growing with stuff on there, various MySQL-related stuff. Because it's a website, so you must have a wiki. So MySQL Proxy is relatively new. It does almost exactly what you think it would. It sits between the client and the server. So you have sort of a client linking to the MySQL library that talks the MySQL protocol over the wire to the MySQL server. So it either, if you're running the app and the database server on the same machine, it may be over the Unix socket or something there, or it may be over TCP, but running on the same box, or between multiple boxes, whatever. It's just sitting between that. They always speak the MySQL protocol. So MySQL Proxy sits between them, and you can do a bunch of stuff with it, as in it's a proxy for the protocol, like Squid and stuff is for HTTP. So you can do things like monitor and analyze and transform their communication. So you can do kind of cool things like use Lua scripts, because Lua seems to be the language of choice these days for little scriptable stuff, embedding in programs. But you can do stuff like load balance, so you can hook into the connection inside the protocol. So when you start doing a connect, the MySQL proxy can then choose which backend it connects to. You can do things like load balancing and like do your replication, read-write kind of things in there. Or you can do things like rewrite queries. So if you decide that this column name really should be something else, just change it like on the wire, and the application won't actually realize, which is kind of evil but kind of cool. And people have done their own solutions to this previously, who've actually munged the protocol on the wire when trying to do upgrades of systems without downtime. And MySQL proxy, the idea is that this will be done sort of the right way instead of the wrong way that people have done. So you can rewrite queries or result sets. So for example, if you don't like the number 2, you can just remove the number 2 from any result coming back from the MySQL server for your client. But you could do other like fancy stuff in there, like, I don't know, convert dates to a specific format or something. If some application's broken, you need to change output stuff. So you can also like add commands. There's a demo up there of adding a shell command to the MySQL server protocol. So instead of writing like select from foo, you go shell and a shell command, and the MySQL proxy server executes that and returns the result, which is kind of evil in a security hole, but you can still like add new syntax of various things in there, and also could be used for like if you want extra logging or something like that. So you could use it to log sort of which application or other special stuff that's going on, and sort of avoid sending it to the SQL server, and just have the proxy server sort of implement your extensions to MySQL, which is kind of cool. So you can do all sorts of other fun of various levels of evil. So we also did MySQL 5.0 a while ago. Hopefully, if you're using MySQL, you've moved to 5.0 by now. Or is anyone still on 4.1? Time to time? 4.0? 323? 322? 321? So hopefully no one's using anything less than 4.1 or 5.0 now. But 5.0 was been around for a while, and back in October 2005 we declared it GA, and when it actually became like real GA, is like really production ready, is still under debate, but we kind of realized that now it's okay and has been for a while. So we're currently like 5.051, which is a fair bit on from 15, but there's been a few bug fixes since then as well. And also lots of InnoDB scalability improvements in recent releases. That was a big issue in 5.0 on many CPUs running InnoDB, but that seems to be solved now. At least I've been told. So 5.0 introduced a bunch of new things, the MySQL server, which a lot of people have criticized us for not having in the past. We did cursors, because you need cursors to do stored procedures. So we do like ANSI compliant, SQL compliant stored procedures. 4 caveats, but close enough. We do triggers, so you can do triggers on tables and go and do other stuff based on it, which is pretty cool, as well as views. There are a few limitations in how views are executed, so some views are more efficient than others, but it actually ends up running rather quickly, just depending on your data size. So if you've got big data size, you sometimes have to care about how the SQL server runs your views, but otherwise it's fine. But we do views, which is cool. Introduced something called information schema, which is a database that's like a metadatabase. So instead of like doing show tables, you do select star from information schema.tables. You start doing SQL queries on all the data dictionary stuff inside the SQL server. And this is, again, SQL standard and ways to extend it. So we get to have endless conversations on how exactly to represent something in information schema when we have an extension that's not covered by SQL standard. Things like indexes aren't actually an SQL standard. Like, it's bizarre. Yes, because it's double as good. And Stewart can't type. But I'll blame jet lag. But we also introduced precision math. So you maybe know how FPU calculations work, where it's kind of approximate. So we've actually produced it now. So when you actually do things like 0.0001, when you add it together 10,000 times, we actually get 1 and not something close to 1. The problem with the old FPU way of doing math, of course, is that you move it between CPU architectures or even like libcs between operating systems, and you can get a different result, which isn't good if you want to replicate between things. So it's now sort of exact all the time and correct, which is kind of cool. A little bit slower, but you can still use the old way if you so choose. Also introduced the archive storage engine, which is an interesting storage engine in that it supports insert and select and doesn't support update or delete. So it's useful in things where you want logging, where you want to like insert things rather rapidly, and it inserts into a buffer and then compresses it to disk. So it's actually a compressed table type where there's no indexes or anything. It just blats rows to disk sort of as fast as it can, compressed. And you can select back from it. And people like that there's no update or delete because it's really useful for like audit logs, where actually if you want to update a row, you have to rewrite the entire table and have permission to do that. So that's kind of cool. Federated storage engine as well. Federated doesn't store things locally. What it does is it opens up a connection to another MySQL server and constructs SQL queries to send across to the other MySQL server and then gets the results back. So if you actually want to query a table on a remote machine and join it with one on your local machine, you can have a federated table to that remote machine and join between local and remote tables, which gets kind of interesting. So it works well in 5.0 for a bunch of situations and not in others. It's not necessarily too smart in constructing the SQL queries to send across the wire, because you can't just copy what the user typed in and send it across the wire, because if you're talking to local tables and remote tables, you can't actually reference them on one server. You have to split it out. So Federated is sort of improving in the future as well, and there's currently a community project called Federated X. So the developer of Federated now doesn't work for MySQL, but works somewhere else, and he's hacking it all up to do a whole lot better stuff. And there's also one that does ODBC drivers behind it. So if you have something you can access through ODBC, you can like set up a connection to that through your MySQL server and query it like a table. So his big demo was, hey, I can use like ODBC to connect to Postgres and query Postgres from within MySQL. Other things can even be more evil with ODBC. So that's pretty cool. XA transactions, which is this horrible, horrible name for doing like two-phase commit between multiple transactional systems. And ODB supports that in 5.0, and like Falcon will in some version in the future. I'm not quite sure when. There's also this wonderful thing called strict mode, which if you've ever criticized MySQL for like loosely converting data here, there, and everywhere, strict mode gets to be rather strict on what data goes in and what comes out kind of thing on formatting and stuff like that. So if you put in like invalid stuff, it'll throw an error instead of sort of like silently converting it. So this sort of should hopefully silence people. It's not on by default because we don't want to break existing apps, which is always a problem. But it's there and it works well. There's a bit data type. Believe it or not, we didn't have a bit to do bit masks. So in 5.0 you can do like bit masks and stuff fairly efficiently. And larger varchar, because of course you want more characters, variable character string. So it's up to about 64K on most engines.
I've noticed that traditionally data type automatically I was wondering whether technically it's still
Bit data type versus tiny int 1 probably depends on the storage engine. Some storage engines have sort of a native implementation for bit, so they'll actually be smart about it. Like for a cluster, what we do is in the bitmap at the start of the row that says, are we storing this column in this row, we actually embed the bit directly in that, so it goes directly in that bitmap. But for other engines, they may not understand to do something cool like that, so they have like, you convert it to a single character column and put all the bits in there. But it should collate them together, so if you have like 8 bits in the row, it should be one tiny int, I think. I don't know that bit of the SQL server that well. Cool. And there's a bunch of optimizer improvements as well. So 5.0 did a bunch of new optimizer stuff to get like better queries in a bunch of situations. So we have had some people say that 5.0 can actually be faster than like 4.0, which is like strange because we added a lot. In some situations, not everywhere. In some areas, it's still a lot slower. But it's doing okay. And 5.1 has got more stuff, which is kind of cool. So 5.1 is currently in beta/RC, recent RC, and some people are debating about how much RC it actually is, but the idea is that it's stabilizing fairly rapidly. So people are actually like using it in places. If it's like mission critical and you don't need the feature set, I wouldn't upgrade yet. I'd wait a while. But it has passed that wonderful milestone. So the Stewart software theory. My theory is that software is generally annoying until it gets to a 0.20 release. As in when you get to 0.20 on like a, as in x.x.20, not like x.20, but x.x.20, it's no longer really annoying. It can still be annoying, but it's just no longer really annoying. And you can actually follow through all stuff like this. Like when did Linux kernel 2.4 stop being annoying? Around 2.4.20, right? When did 2.6 stop being annoying? Around 2.6.20. When... but it's a whole lot less annoying, like most shit works now. And so when did other stuff stop getting annoying? It's always .20. Like, when did GNOME stop being really annoying? 2.20, right? And stuff like that. It's .20 magic there. You'll notice some projects just add on the front number there, and you notice how they're still annoying. I don't think evolution will ever not be annoying, so I don't know when they're hitting .20, but it's a long way off. 20 gig of memory usage, maybe. But so why has 5.1 taken so long? You may remember I said October 2005 for 5.0, and 5.1's like RC now. Well, I think there's kind of two reasons. One is an ambitious feature set. We've had this like feature creep-itis go on. You notice 5.0 was huge and took forever, and 5.1 was still pretty big and took a while. And quality as well. We sort of had this giant wake-up call where a bunch of people actually started listening to when we were screaming, hey, the server quality has gone a bit down and it's a bit shit. And so we actually sort of had a bit of a wake-up call and spent a whole bunch of time just fixing bugs. So if you actually look, like certain like 5.0 releases just fixed pages and pages of bugs. And we're much better now with actually classifying bugs about what is actually a release stopper versus what is something you can kind of live with and all kind of like that. So we actually have like reports of saying, these 10 bugs are stopping release. You know, we can't go GA without this. And we still argue about like classification of bugs and whether they should be there or not. But, you know, at least there's something a bit better than what they used to be. So the 5.0 quality is now like really good, as in like some big people have actually moved along big installations to 5.0 and like liked it, not hated themselves for it or gone back. So it's looking better now. 5.1 is actually past the .20 release already. So I say it stopped being really annoying, which is kind of nice. It also introduces a bunch of new features. We've introduced partitioning. Hey. So partitioning is storing one table in several sort of subtables, so to speak. So you give it a bunch of restrictions there and it stores it in a bunch of different places. So the idea being that it's like having like 10 tables for the one thing, but instead it's one table in 10 places. So it's kind of neat for performance characteristics. So then each of these is like their own little bit and they have their own indexes. It's not a global index. So when you have your own index on each partition, it means that if you can prune off several partitions in the optimizer, you're only going to access that one partition, which means that if all your like current data is in one partition, you can load a smaller index into memory and keep it cached, and your queries run faster because you've got less index stuff around. So that's kind of neat from a performance kind of deal. We do by key, by range, and by list, and a bunch of things like there. And you can like add drop partitions of various levels of online doing like that. But generally you can do it online, which is actually a really tricky problem to solve. But that's pretty cool and useful performance. For MySQL cluster, we added a whole bunch of stuff as well. This is what I work on, so it's like part of my baby. MySQL cluster replications. You can now replicate from one cluster to another cluster, which is kind of cool. I should point out that MySQL cluster is really distinct from MySQL replication, and having a collection of MySQL servers is not MySQL cluster. MySQL cluster is its own engine. So we did cluster-to-cluster replication. We did disk data. Previously, MySQL cluster was all in memory. You can now have non-indexed columns on disk. We're sort of improving that as releases go on. We do row-based replication, which was actually needed for MySQL cluster replication, which is lovely implementation detail that we can talk technical about later. But row-based replication actually replicates each changed row instead of each SQL statement. And it means that even non-deterministic things can be replicated reliably between MySQL servers. So some people believe this is the only true way to replicate a database. It's the only 100% correct way to replicate a database, but it's another alternative, which is kind of cool. We did an event scheduler, which is kind of like cron inside the database. If you've ever set up a database with a bunch of like jobs that should be run every so often, so you run it in cron, and then you transfer the database server and forget to transfer the cron jobs and wonder why things break. Yeah, I've done that. But event schedulers inside the database, so it's all like cross-platform and everything. So if someone suddenly deploys your product on Windows, you don't have to worry about using its stupid event scheduler thing. You can just do it all in the database and be done with it. You can also do logs in tables. So for like the MySQL slow query log or general query log, now like in SQL tables, you can run queries from them, which is kind of cool and still kind of new, but it's cool. XML functions. So you actually start to process XML inside the database server instead of out on the app side. So if you just want to extract like one value, you can do like X query lookups and stuff for specific stuff inside XML blobs and sort of process that in the database server to get it out instead of actually shipping the blob all the way to your client and then processing it there, which can be a performance advantage or not, depending on your app. You can also do update XML. So when you update part of the XML, instead of shipping it to the client, updating a few bytes and sending it all the way back, you can sort of update it in place on the server. So that can be useful in some cases as well. And we have this thing called a plugin API. We're increasingly going to have more loadable, pluggable modules. You sort of load in at runtime and get things like storage engines and pluggable functions and full text parsers and basically anything. Someone wrote an evil patch that adds a different SQL not SQL, but another query language in there that's kind of pluggable, which could be kind of cool in the future. But for some definition of API. We also are releasing 6.0 at the same time, currently in an alpha release. And this just adds a few extra things on 5.1. It's my deep hope that 6.0 will be relatively soon after 5.1 and we will have solved this release problem. So hopefully it'll be relatively soon stabilized after 5.1. But it adds a few things. The Falcon storage engine, which is another new storage engine, which does a few cool things where it's new and it's transactional. And the idea is that it's more optimized for what typical web apps do. It's much more designed in the days we are now, where main memory is really big and really cheap, and disk is about the same speed it was 20 years ago. There's just more of it. So it's really using main memory for more than just a larger cache, which has shown some promising performance stuff, but it's always still early days, so we'll see what happens. But fairly promising now. Also in 6.0, we've got the backup database syntax, which is this lovely new command, which guess what it does? It backs up the database. Truncates everything. No. There's even restore database syntax, which personally I like better than backup. But backup database does an online backup of your database server. So the idea is that it won't block access to tables while it takes a backup. This actually depends on what storage engine you use and if that storage engine has a native backup driver. So for storage engines that do repeatable read isolation, so InnoDB, you can just do a repeatable read stuff in there and it works for online. I'm not sure what we're doing with MyISM, but other storage engines like Archive is pretty easy to do consistent backup because it's append only. You sort of remember where the point was where you started the backup and just back up until then. So that's pretty easy and they've got a native driver for that. So it's online if the table supports it and will do a consistent backup across storage engines. So if you have multiple storage engines and data relationships between them, online backup will do what you want it to do, which is kind of different than now. So this is people have been spending a lot of time on because it's a real tricky problem to solve. Pluggable storage engines and stuff are great, except that it makes a whole bunch of problems a lot harder. The foreign key guys to do why doesn't MySQL have foreign keys for every engine? Turns out it's actually really tricky to implement foreign key constraints in any remote standards compliance way. With multiple storage engines. It's actually pretty tricky. Interesting tidbit is that no database actually implements the SQL standard for foreign keys. No one is fully standards compliant. It's all an approximation, which is good fun. A bunch of optimizer improvements went in for subqueries and joins. So subqueries have been criticized in the fact of how they're evaluated. So they evaluate the entire expression and then get the result set and do it like that, which can be kind of a performance suck in some applications. So they've done a lot of work on improving how subqueries run and joins as well. So hopefully we're getting better subquery and join performance in 6.0 for some set of queries. Not everything, but some. All optimizer improvements are all for some subset. So it's a lot of work to improve 10% of queries people run. But we get there. There's also a load XML syntax. So if you actually put rows in an XML format, you can use this load XML syntax to suck it out of XML into the database. So you can save as XML and load as XML kind of directly instead of having some application foo to fudge it. And we've also done a whole bunch of stuff for MySQL cluster. So we actually have a separate release stream for MySQL cluster to get sort of more frequent releases with features instead of polluting 5.1 with new features. So we've done MySQL cluster carrier grade edition, which you may have heard of, otherwise known as telco. And so a bunch of these changes are now getting back into 6.0. So we've done replication conflict detection and resolution, which is if you have a bunch of servers and you replicate in a circle around and you update the same row in multiple places, and there's a replication delay, they run into each other and go, this row was changed in 2 places at roughly the same time. What do I do? So for cluster, at least, we have a way to detect that and actually run some code to resolve that, which is kind of cool. And hopefully we'll get that for other storage engines at some point. I'm not quite sure what the schedule is for that. For cluster as well, we've done online add column. So you may be aware that currently for storage engines inside MySQL, if you go alter table, add column, it copies the entire table. Like it locks the table and then copies it to an entire new table with the new column, which is fine for small tables. When you get to like a 10 gig table, that actually is a fair amount of I/O that you have to do to copy like 10 gig around. So for cluster, we support online add column now. Some other storage engines are getting that as well because we've done the whole infrastructure inside the server to do it. So hopefully other engines will do it soon. I'm told the Falcon implementation is fairly trivial. I don't know what the InnoDB status is, and the MyISM one has promised that it'll be easy, I'm sure. We've done online add drop index as well. We've also done slave batching, so we're trying to improve replication slave performance. Once you get to a certain amount of write traffic in the master, when you're doing master-slave replication, the bottleneck doesn't become the master, it becomes the slave applying the changes. So we're trying to do a whole bunch of improvements inside the slave to actually be able to pump more transactions per second through the replication channels. So for cluster, that's driving it a lot, and we'll see how we go for more improvements. But we're starting on it, which is cool. Replication bind address, so you can bind the replication channel to a specific network interface. Worked on that, which is kind of useful for when you have more than one network card in a machine and you only want replication to run over one of those network cards. That's useful. We've also done real-time improvements for cluster. So responds more like a real-time database. So there's a bunch of real-time guarantees and real-time threads and stuff like that, which is kind of cool if you care about response times. Otherwise, you're probably not going to care. We've also improved a bunch of SQL performance for cluster, which is kind of neat. We have more upcoming technology. This is more stuff coming up. We have improved GIS functions. The geospatial stuff in MySQL has always been regarded as sort of fairly simplistic and not complete. PostGIS is much more complete. So if you have basic GIS functions, like GIS requirements, it works well in MySQL. But once you start getting more complex stuff, it's like Postgres just beats the pants off us. But we've got some improved GIS functions coming up in future stuff. That's currently, you can get the code off MySQL Forge as well, which may meet requirements, but we're still not hugely strong on GIS. We're also doing something called batched key access, which is a new way to do joins, or sort of a same kind of way to do joins. The idea is that we want to run joins faster, so you're doing queries over multiple tables, you want to run that quickly. So we're using the same nested loop join, so we're still going one table iterating through and doing lookups into another. But what we do is instead of for each row, we batch all those key lookups. So if you're joining 2 tables together, instead of going row 1, look up, row 2, look up, row 3, look up, we go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so we need to look up this batch of keys and then submit that to the second table all in one go. So the idea is if you sort this, you can hopefully access those rows in on-disk order, or for cluster, you can batch these up to send across to other nodes, so you end up having less disk I/O or less disk seeking. So it turns out the most expensive thing you can do in a computer today is move the disk arm. That's like ridiculously slow. It goes from I can actually show it on my laptop. You can pull like 40 meg per second off the disk linearly. You start seeking, you're down to like a megabyte per second. So it really is like about a huge performance difference in doing seeks on disk. So this is shown for us somewhere between 3 and 35 times speed improvement for various joins. We're still doing a whole bunch of testing because this is all like new code and stuff, but you can grab the source tree off there and see whether it improves your join performance. The 35 times speed improvement was actually on MyISM tables and not to do with cluster, which is kind of cool. There's also semi-sync replication. So Google does a whole bunch of patches on top of MySQL for how they run it. And they do this cool thing they call semi-sync replication. So MySQL replication is usually asynchronous. So you have transactions committed on the master, and then at some point later, it gets applied to the slave. It's not synchronous. So if your master crashes, then you may lose transactions compared to what's on the slave. But asynchronous is nice because you can run the master at full speed at least. So what it does is semi-sync changes it so that transaction commit isn't returned to the application until the slave, as in one slave, so if you have 10 slaves, it only cares about one slave, until one slave there has the bin log that has that transaction in it. So it means that if your master crashes, the slave will have that transaction. So if the application gets hey, I've committed the transaction from the database, that transaction will be in the bin log of a slave, one of your many slaves. So you then have to work out which slave that is to promote that to the master. And that's not done by this patch, but it actually improves reliability when you want like high uptime times. So I'm not sure when this is going into the main MySQL server, but it's kind of fairly cool. Do we have any questions? I'll pause in the middle here.
I guess when you said 35 times speed, oh, well, actually, this was more of a humorous anecdote, but the last time I heard 35 times speed comment, it was someone at the another MySQL dev, Anthony Curtis, and I said, you know, your pants are still on for someone who's pulled figures out of his...
Yeah, so at least on one query with one data set, there was a 35 times speed improvement. For anything else, is subjective. It may even make some things slower, which is kind of depressing.
Are you still using BitKeeper internally, and have you looked at any of the other distributed revision control systems?
Are we still using BitKeeper internally? Yes. Have we looked at anything else? I might stay quiet. We'll always look for better tools. If there's better tools, we'll switch to them. I mean, you know, personally, I'd like to see us use free revision control system. Nothing wrong with BitKeeper there. I mean, it's a pretty good tool. It does lots of stuff really well. And when we started using it, there wasn't anything else. It was distributed revision control was BitKeeper or nothing. And revision control was then like BitKeeper or CVS. And it turns out we didn't hate ourselves that much. So we switched to something that was less bad. So we may do so in the future. I mean, we'll see.
I've just got a quick question. You mentioned about backup, and I'd probably find this in a Google search, but whether or not the backup functionality is that being brought in also to an API so that other third-party backup products can actually integrate with it? Because I know with, like, RMAN has an API for a third-party backup product to actually integrate with it, so I just didn't know if there was something.
Yeah, so there will be various API and hook-ins there to have third-party products work with backup, the MySQL backup. So the way it's actually done is that what you get back from the MySQL server is just a stream. So it's a backup stream. So you can actually either blit that directly to tape, which was one of the big requirements, right? People want to back up into a stream to tape, not save it on a disk somewhere. So you get back this stream, and you can do other sort of managey stuff in there. We have some like internal catalog, but no doubt, like the Zamanda guys and stuff, we've been talking with them for like ages now. So they'll probably have other stuff that plugs in, and other people can plug in at various levels. So yeah, there will be sort of external,
great, thanks,
easy things to plug in. And the wire protocol is pretty easy to parse anyway, if they don't want to like use our code for it. Anything else now? Or keep going back to our regular programming. So there's lots of other new exciting things coming up. So I'd like to say a bit of a thank you there, and I'm going to go launch into a bit of I preempted my question slide, but a bit of a photo of credits for the start. And I'll go on to a bunch of little photos here. If you don't know, this is the April Fool's Day prank, which a bunch of people pulled, including the now Senior Vice President / CEO, of putting 500 inflatable dolphins, because our logo is a dolphin, because dolphins are cool. And so they disguised themselves and planted 500 dolphins around the Sun campus, which was kind of funny when people walked into Sun. So there's a bunch of photos of MySQLers and stuff out there. But do we have any more questions about various things? Or can go on discussion points. What other bits are of interest? And I'll just talk off the top. Nothing is too technical or too simple. Come on, everyone wants stored procedures in C, right?
One of the features I run into is nullable columns and comparing them to joins. And the problem we have, I've seen this, I don't know if it's a design feature or what, is that...
Can you speak up or close to the microphone?
Oh, okay. Having two tables with nullable columns, doing a join, unless you say like if null and then change it to like an empty string, the join would fail. And I don't know if that's supposed to work that way or what.
I'm not sure. Joins scare me. No, so an amusing anecdote was interviewing someone, and Monty and Brian making fun of me for not knowing the complete join syntax of SQL. I work for a database company. But so you're saying if you've got two tables with multiple columns that you're doing joins on, and you have to have some condition about if it's null or not. Yeah, there's beer in here because we do that.
Yeah, I'm testing one name to another name, but they could be null. Well, either one could be null, unless you say convert them like if null, say empty string to empty string, the null could fail.
I'm not quite sure what the details are with null stuff there, but I imagine it's documented somewhere in the MySQL documentation that I would have to read if I was asking that same question. So sorry. But yeah, nulls can bite you in the ass.
Hi.
Hi.
Another fellow Aussie here. So I'd just like to ask about the licensing.
Licensing?
What's the current state of licensing?
Cool. So everything is GPL. So the MySQL server is GPL and the client library is GPL. So it's fine if you're writing like free software related stuff. Just use the client library and you're done. If you're going to do commercial software, then you can buy a license that is non-GPL. So MySQL actually sells licenses for the client library, so you can link it into your proprietary app. So this has been like major sources of income over the past years or whatever. And OEMs do that for like embedding it in various things. But the main server is like GPL, or you can buy a commercial license to it. I mean, commercial license, you can still get the source. I mean, it's the same source between commercial and non-commercial builds. So even like the MySQL Enterprise stuff, so the paid-for pack, which is built a bit differently or whatever, it's still a GPL server. I mean, you only really need a GPL, non-GPL client license if you're embedding it in non-GPL code or non-GPL compatible code.
I work in mobility, so it's a big deal to be able to replicate between your server and your client node. So a lot of the feature set that you described in the cluster definition is actually something that I've written a lot of code that does exactly the same thing, except in Java, and it's for hub and spoke replication across multiple slaves on a time-delayed replication stream. So basically, have you got any plans to apply your cluster replication model to a distributed system, and does your licensing have the ability to, scale out to thousands of nodes, rather than just looking at 5 major replication servers, replication clusters?
So you're wanting to do stuff like multiple machines running MySQL and sort of like lazily replicate between them, like disconnect and reconnect?
Yeah.
There isn't really anything like that apart from storing a binary log until you reconnect. Is currently what's really there. There's nothing really designed for the kind of thing, like the mobile handheld market where you make a bunch of changes and then connect and sort of like work out the delta. Yeah. If you're willing to keep the replication logs, then yeah, that works. And you apply the replication logs up to a master. But otherwise, there's nothing to really merge 2 databases together.
So it probably wouldn't scale if you had 1,000 clients.
If you had 1,000 clients and you wanted to replay the database logs to it, that should probably work. I mean, it's just really... You can only have one master at the current time in there, so there's not really multi-master, so you can't sort of do more than one of them at once, which is the main problem. But you could, at some point, let's really hope. So if you actually get the binary log, you could then just parse that file and run the SQL against the MySQL server in parallel, and that could work. There is plans, like Mats and stuff has had plans to get out a little C++ library for parsing the binary log file, especially if you're doing row-based replication, and to be able to write other apps to do that. There exists an API inside the MySQL server now, the MySQL injector library, and we use that for cluster replication. So in NDB cluster binlog.cc, in the SQL source, we use that to implement the replication because we inject stuff into the binary log. So that can kind of work for like writing a binary log, but there is kind of like APIs to the binary log inside the SQL server. We've been hoping to make it sort of external, the idea that then you could parse the binary log, and then, for example, in that kind of a situation, have a little app that picks up the binary log from your clients that have been disconnected, parses through it, and runs 100 threads in parallel for 100 clients and blitz it there, but it doesn't currently exist. The file format's pretty simple. Other people have parsed that in the past. Some other big companies have actually written apps that parsed that and converted it to various things. Like, actually, Mark said this publicly, so I can repeat it. They did it for Google when they were doing their 4.0 to 5.0 migration. They actually parsed the 5.0 logs, binary logs, so they could be parsed by a 4.0 server. So they had a downgrade path as well during the migration. So there's some stuff like that that exists in various places. It doesn't matter if you're finding it, but the file format's not too hard if you just want to write it from scratch. And if you ask on the internals list, people will tell you anything you can't work out.
Do you see mobility and support for the mobile functions increasing in the future? Because it's a real gap in the market where this stuff is all considered still on LANs and on a always connected mode, whereas the support for offline disconnected is really bad.
I see a lot more like devices like that. I mean, for example, we don't have a Windows CE port, which is, fuck Windows, right? But from a point of view of market share, there's a lot of devices that are Windows CE, like my cell phone. So it would be cool to have a port to that. We haven't really spent too much time doing like specific mobile market stuff, but we should. I mean, currently the idea is that maybe you use like SQLite on the mobile thing because it's smaller and lighter. I mean, the MySQL server has just grown so much. Like it's now, SQLite's what, 200K versus an embedded MySQL server maybe like a meg for the library. So SQLite may be better there, and then we just need better tools to like read and synchronize between them.
Okay, thanks.
Good question up the front or back?
Hi. Is it possible to bypass SQL layer and write as quickly as possible through some like lower level layers like InnoDB, and then at a later time use the same table space to run a query through?
So is it
SQL?
possible to bypass the SQL layer and write directly to a lower level API? For some storage engines do support that. So MySQL Cluster has its own API that you can actually write whole apps against. For the MySQL server, there's actually like handler statements. You may see this in the SQL syntax. You can go handler. And so the handler interface is like the low-level interface inside the SQL server about how we communicate to storage engines. And you can kind of use that directly through the MySQL network protocol. I don't know whether it is faster or not than just doing simple SQL. But, with prepared statements, if you're blitting a lot of stuff in, like using prepared statements actually ends up being fairly quick. And you can use the handler calls as well, like in there. Or if you want to do it casually, evilly, you could actually insert a module into the MySQL server that just calls the handlers directly. So if you want to write a bit more C code, just embed it in as a loadable module inside the SQL server that calls the handler directly. Which, is not sort of pluggable in the fact that you have to rebuild it for each MySQL server version. But like you can now, it's pretty easy to embed plugins inside the SQL server that do that and present it over another protocol maybe. The blob streaming engine that Paul McCullough has worked on actually is a loadable module for the MySQL server that lets you interface with blobs via HTTP. So that might be a good example to start at looking at how that's done and if that maybe suits your needs. It could probably be modified to do like whole rows instead of just blobs.
The idea is to bypass the network layer completely, to just take InnoDB and write directly to it.
Yeah. So maybe just have like a loadable thing inside the SQL server that talks directly to the handler interface. That could work for you.
Thank you.
Or just extend the protocol a bit. Up the front, I think.
Wondering generally what the priority level is for the proxy feature. That's like the coolest thing from a NetOps perspective that I've seen you guys come out with in a long time, and I'm super pumped about it. I think last time I looked, it was at alpha. Is it sort of like a side project, or is everyone really stoked about it? Or
so everyone's pretty excited about proxy, especially like marketing folks. But if you go from a developer level, Jan's spending a lot of time on it, so it's fairly decent priority there. I think, I don't know what percentage time, but there's a fair amount of time and effort put into it because they're actually going to release some other so proxy is going to be like all GPL and free and everything, and then there's going to be sort of add-ons, so giant collections of scripts that we're going to try and monetize or something. So it's fairly, once you attach a revenue stream to something, then like priority suddenly jumps. But it's given a fairly decent priority. I think now they're calling like beta or something. I don't know, that may be the title. I'm just pulling that out of my ass. So probably check the site or something, but it's fairly promising now. And so I think some people may be using it even in actual deployment and stuff already. But it's fairly decent priority level on that. Actually, Jan should be, he is in town. So he's at we have a MySQL user conference next week down the road in Santa Clara Convention Center. So that's on, and so most of the various developers are there. So Jan is actually in town in San Francisco even. I'm going to try and bring him along to stuff tonight as well. Jan Konechki. So yeah, it's got fairly decent priority. Do you have a question?
Hey. What do you think? What is the best way to synchronize like a lot of MyISM tables between a bunch of servers? Each table is about like 2 gigs and has about like a lot of blobs data.
So what's the best way to synchronize MyISM tables between servers with about 2 gig in size?
No,
How are we doing for time? Am I being...
You've got about a minute.
About a minute. Let's see if I can answer this in a minute.
Like
50 seconds.
Like sorry. Like
MatKit. So there's actually a utility that actually connects the two tables and synchronizes it together, and it's called MAATKIT, MatKit. So that probably has a utility in there to do it.
It does.
It does have a utility.
I use MapKit all the time. A lot of times in replication, we've got large tables that get out of sync because every now and then the schema makes a mistake. And MapKit actually has a utility that will actually one utility that will actually determine whether or not the tables are out of sync, regardless of the order of rows. And another utility that will generate that will generate SQL syntax that can run against the master. A whole bunch of delete statements that will run against the master and then roughly goes down to the slave. We'll make sure that both the master and the slave tables are the same.
Distribute data tables between servers. Is there any way to redistribute tables between servers? Put.
So you're like doing sharding between multiple machines. You want to like reshard it? Nothing that I'm aware of that automatically does it. Everyone writes their own. It would be a really good thing to like write a product and sell it to people for. Maybe someone will realize this, but yeah, there's nothing automatic. You could kind of do it through some proxy stuff to kind of keep your apps going like that, but yeah, nothing automatic.
Okay, what about Berkeley DB storage engine?
Berkeley DB storage engine? Dead. Both users are okay with that. And I do mean both, as in 2 maximum. Do you have a question as well? Berkeley DB, shaking your head.
Actually, yeah, I do have a question. With query parallelization in MySQL, with partitioning, that new feature, is there anything planned for that?
We don't have any MySQL server-based query parallelization. So some engines may do it themselves, like Cluster, we do it kind of.